make up the commission. Quorum speaks to the minimum number of commissioners that must be present to make a binding decision. It speaks to the number of commissioners who, when duly assembled, are legally competent to transact the business of the commission. As defined in Black's Law Dictionary, it is the minimum number of members who must be present for a deliberative assembly to legally transact business. Article 250 of the Constitution cannot therefore fill the gap which the IEBC says was created by the declaration of unconstitutionality of the provisions that had sought to amend paragraphs 5 and 7 of the second schedule. In the case of Mary Wambui, the Supreme Court in paragraph 87 of the judgment expressed as follows: however, while we have pronounced ourselves on the issue of invalidity of section 76(1) of the Elections Act, in line with the Constitution, this court is not precluded from considering the application of the principles of retroactivity or proactivity on a case-to-case basis. I then look at the decisions they cited there, including the decision by Justice Kriegler in the South African case of Sears Moyes, and I then go on to say that the decision of the High Court in the case of Katiba Institute was silent on the effective date of the declaration of unconstitutionality. Based on the decision of the Supreme Court, I take the view that the default position is that the declaration of unconstitutionality related back to when the unconstitutional provisions were enacted, with the result, in my respective view, that the status quo ante was restored. Therefore, the requirement of quorum of 5 applies. I am therefore in agreement with the High Court that when it pronounced in the judgment that IEBC Act categorically places the quorum of IEBC for purposes of transacting business at 5 commissioners, and that IEBC did not have that quorum at the time it made the consequential decision related to the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill. IEBC also contended that the impugned decision of the High Court runs afoul of a subsisting decision in rem in a constitutional matter, in the case of Isaiah B. Watt, which has been extensively cited. And I'll cut through and just say, I am conscious that this court is not presently sitting on appeal from the judgment of Isaiah B. Watt. However, it seems to me that quite apart from reading into the text of paragraph 5 of the schedule, the words policy decisions, and apart from mixing up composition with quorum, the learned judge appears to have either overlooked or infused statutory provisions with what she considered to be common sense when she stated, quote, "My take is that the issue of quorum, apart from being a matter provided for under the statute, is also a matter of common sense and construction, depending on the total number of commissioners." And then I have the rest of the passage, and then I say, further, in making that pronouncement, the learned judge does not appear to have considered the provisions of paragraph 8 of the second schedule, which provides, subject to paragraph 5, no proceedings of the commission shall be invalid by reason only of a vacancy among the members thereof. Under that provision, the requirement under paragraph 5 is overriding. The pronouncement by the judge in the above cited passage appears, therefore, to be an abrogation of a statutory provision, and to that extent is per incuriam. Consequently, the High Court in the present case was entitled, for that reason, among other reasons the court gave, to depart from it. Moreover, the statutory commands in the IEBC Act, if heeded and complied with, would have ensured that the number of commissioners would not have fallen below the number required to form a quorum. For those reasons, the complaint regarding the findings by the High Court as to quorum have no merit. I then move on to the issue of continuous voter registration, and I think I'll just say what I concluded. The High Court cannot therefore be faulted for having concluded, as it did, that there was no evidence that IEBC had discharged its obligation of continuous voter registration. I would therefore not interfere with the decision of the High Court. The last aspect I think I'll look at, separate and distinct referendum questions. On that I say, in my reading of those provisions, that is of the Constitution, It is the bill in which an amendment proposal is contained that is submitted to the people to vote on in the referendum by indicating whether they agree or disagree with the amendment proposal, much in the same way as the members of the county assemblies and members of the houses of parliament would have signified their approval or disapproval of the amendment process in the draft bill. It seems to me, therefore, that under Article 257(10) of the Constitution, as read with other provisions in that article, what is envisaged of the voter at the referendum is for the voter to make a choice to ratify or not to ratify, to approve or not to approve the amendment proposal in the draft bill. However, that choice, in my view, is rendered nugatory, inoperative, and consequential if the voter is called upon to vote on an omnibus draft bill that contains a raft of numerous, diverse, and unrelated proposed amendments to the Constitution, in this case over 70 proposals, that cut across the entire spectrum of the Constitution. And I cite the passage there from the High Court decision entitled Alila. The argument made for the respondents on the principle of unity of content or single subject matter, that constitutional amendment through a referendum should deal only with one main issue, is one I find most attractive and persuasive. It was argued that under that principle, the proposed amendment should deal with one subject only to allow the voter to form and express their opinion freely and genuinely. In other words, if a proposed constitutional amendment includes several substantive questions, the voter may not have a free choice, that each proposed constitutional amendment ought to secure adoption on its own merits, not on the merits of other different proposals to which it is attached, and that there must be an intrinsic connection between the various parts of each question to put to the vote in order to guarantee freedom of suffrage, and the voter must not be expected to accept or reject as a whole provisions without an intrinsic link between them. I would venture to suggest that what is envisaged under Article 257 is an amendment bill on single thematic topic to which the provisions in the draft bill must relate. For instance, a bill proposing amendments to the provisions on land under Part 1 of the Chapter 5 of the Constitution would, in my view, be incongruous with proposals in the same bill for amendment of the unrelated matters of the Office of Parliament under Part 3 of Chapter 8 of the Constitution. Ultimately, it seems to me that to put a single binary question or multiple questions is a matter to be informed by the nature of the amendment proposed. It may well be that certain proposed amendments may require separate and distinct referendum questions to be framed. What, in my view, Article 257(10) of the Constitution does not contemplate is the submission to the people in a referendum of an omnibus amendment bill, a hodgepodge of an amendment bill such as the Constitution Amendment Bill in this case. The argument that it would be impractical on account of logistical difficulties to formulate over 70 separate and distinct questions is perhaps more the reason that an omnibus amendment bill should never be entertained. Then I move on to constituency apportionment, and I think I have agreed with the lead judgment of the President, and so I will not deal with that. And then I deal with the matters touching on the President. Under this head, the issues are whether the President's right to fair hearing was violated, whether the President enjoys absolute immunity under the Constitution, whether the High Court was right in declaring that the occupier of the office of the President is liable to being sued in his personal capacity during his tenure of office. And I think I'll just go to the conclusions, which are as follows. Article 51 of the Constitution provides that every person has the right to have any dispute that can be resolved by application of law, decided in a fair and public hearing before a court, or if appropriate, another independent and impartial tribunal. Therein is the long-standing principle of natural justice that traces back to Ridge versus Baldwin, and also the case of Onyango, Olo Onyango versus Attorney General. I have also cited it there. The critical question, which is a matter of fact, is whether the President was firstly served with a petition 426 in which he was named as the first respondent, and secondly, whether he was served with notice of hearing. The record of proceedings of 21st of January 2021 show that the High Court gave directions on the conduct of the consolidated petitions. Among the directions given on 21st were directions that, quote, all the petitioners in the 7 petitions to serve the petitions on all the parties by close of business on 22nd of January 2021. The Deputy Registrar to facilitate the process where necessary, and that the respondents, interested parties, and amici to file and serve their responses to the various petitions within 14 days. On the same date, directions were given by the court regarding exchange of written submissions and the conduct of the hearing and hearing dates. The record shows that on subsequent appearances before the High Court, under the quorum in relation to petition 426 of 2020, the court always indicated no appearance for first respondent. The record does not show whether after the directions given on 22nd January 2021, any inquiry or follow-up was made by the court to confirm that his directions regarding service had been complied with. In subsequent attendances before the High Court, the record continued to reflect that there was no appearance for the first respondent, that is the President, in petition 426. The petitioner in 426, Isaac Aluochier, indicated on the face of the petition that it was to be served at the office of the President, Harambee House, Harambee Avenue, Nairobi. An email address was given and telephone numbers and a Twitter handle. Before this court, Mr. Aluochier filed a supplementary affidavit dated 8th June 2021 in which he attached an affidavit of service sworn on 16th of January 2021, in which he stated that he served the petition by email on all the parties, including the President, whom he served at the stated email address on 21st of December. He stated further that he also lodged a service request with the judiciary e-filing platform and got a response on 15th January, and that all parties had been served. Notwithstanding the directions given by the High Court on 21st of January, to which I have referred, it appears to me that the question whether the President was in fact served with a petition and the hearing notice in respect of the hearing appears to have been overlooked by the High Court. The continued indication in the record, no appearance for first respondent against the name of the President after the directions given on 21st of January should respectfully have signaled the court to inquire whether the President had in fact been served. The depositions by Mr. Aluochier in his affidavit sworn on 16th January 2021 filed in hearing are matters that should have been presented before the High Court in order to satisfy itself that the President was duly served. In paragraph 537 of the judgment, the High Court observes that the President did not enter appearance in these proceedings, and neither did he file any grounds of objection or replying affidavit to contest these proceedings on the ground of misjoinder or any other ground. However, there is no indication that the High Court satisfied itself that service had been effected in the first place. Indeed, in the same paragraph of the High Court judgment, the court stated, quote, as much as the Honorable Attorney General has come to his defense, the grounds of objection and submissions filed by the Honorable Attorney General are clearly stated to have been filed on behalf of the Attorney General himself and not for Mr. Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, end of quote. An acknowledgement, in my view, that the proceedings against the President were undefended. Having concluded that the Attorney General could not in this instance represent the President, it was imperative for the court to satisfy itself that the President had been served with the petition and the hearing notice. It is also noteworthy that although the High Court expressed in paragraph 532 of its judgment that the question whether the President can be sued in his personal capacity and not as the President of the Republic is a question that, quote, should be determined as a preliminary issue, quote, it was not in fact handled in that manner. For had it been handled in such manner, the determination should have been made before the substantive hearing of the petition commenced to afford the President an opportunity to defend himself in his personal capacity. By making the determination in the final judgment, that opportunity was lost. All in all, I am not persuaded that it was satisfactorily demonstrated that service on the President was effected, and for that reason alone, I would set aside the orders made by the High Court against the President in petition 426 of 2020. On the presidential immunity question, I have indicated that I sat in the judgment of this court in Kenya Human Rights Commission and another versus Attorney General, and my views have not changed that the decision of the High Court is right. In that regard, I still hold, therefore, and agree with the pronouncement by the High Court in the present case that the President can be sued in his personal capacity during his tenure because the protection afforded under Article 143(3) of the Constitution extends, quote, anything done or not done in the exercise of his power under the Constitution. On the issue of the amicus curiae, I have referred to the Supreme Court decision of Trusted Society of Human Rights and the extensive guidelines that were given there, and I have concluded that it was not demonstrated that the High Court exercised its discretion wrongly in admitting the amici. On the issue of justiciability, I have said that the matter was ripe and that it was not prudent for anybody to wait until the provisions became the Constitution and then have to contend with Article 2(3) of the Constitution, which prohibits any challenges to the Constitution. So with that, I will end it there and hand it over back to the President. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my brother Justice Gatembu. It is now 1:40. We shall adjourn for 1 hour, and so we will be back at 2:40. The court will adjourn.